forever. A friend in the publishing industry had randomly sent me the book. Now it seemed like a cosmic joke. I wasn't really in the mood to read, though. A nurse was in there with me, too, to keep an eye on me. When I had to pee, she turned her back to give me some privacy. So this was Suicide Watch. I sat there in my scrubs and I tried to wrap my head around where my life was headed, answering yes to all those questions. How often do you feel unsafe? Have you had thoughts of ending your life? Do you have difficulty sleeping due to memories of past events? Had driven home just how desperately I needed help and how close I was to hurting myself, or worse. But I also knew clearly that just a few miles from here, a huge campaign machine was churning away to get me elected as the next mayor of Kansas City. I was going to win, too. Not only was I up in the polls, but I'd raised 3 times as much money as the 9 other candidates combined. It was funny, in a way. How many countless hours had I spent in windowless rooms, making calls for hours on end to ask campaign donors for money? At least this windowless room had a toilet, even if it was of the no-lid stainless steel variety. Finally, after about half an hour, a psychiatrist, a young resident, came into the room. It was evident that he didn't know who I was, which was a huge relief. I was used to feeling people's eyes on me wherever I went, but usually it felt oddly comforting, even empowering. But here, it was humiliating. For the next 30 minutes, I confessed everything I'd spent years hiding from the world. My night terrors, my consuming fear of someone hurting me and my family, my ever-present anger, my unrelenting guilt and punishing shame, my inability to feel joy, and my increasing dislike of myself. I told him how much of a burden I'd become to everyone around me. To my surprise, he seemed to take it all in stride. He asked what I had planned for the rest of the day, and I said I had to go pick up my son, True, from school at 4:30. That's good, the doctor said, which I took to mean, if you're making plans, you're not going to kill yourself today. But maybe he wanted to double-check. He reviewed his notes, looked up at me, and asked, "Do you have a particularly stressful job or something?" Now, I was used to introducing myself dozens of times a day, but it hadn't been a real introduction for years. It was more like a pantomime of humility. When I said, "Hi, I'm Jason Kander, and I'm running for," I was usually flanked by people wearing T-shirts with my name spelled out in giant letters. So I said flatly, "I'm in politics." He seemed curious. What does that mean? I thought about listing off my resume. Should I start with my time serving in the state legislature, being elected Secretary of State of Missouri, running for the U.S. Senate in 2016 and just barely losing? Should I talk about getting ready to run for president and giving speeches in 46 states in the past year alone? Or how I decided to run for mayor instead? I figured I'd just cut to the punchline. Well, I almost ran for president, but then decided to run for mayor instead, and tomorrow I'm planning on calling that off. You were going to run for president? The doctor blinked a few times. Of what? He looked confused. In fairness, you would be too, if you were a psych resident and some random 37-year-old in ill-fitting scrubs on Suicide Watch claimed to be a presidential candidate. I knew it would sound silly to answer his question, but I did. Of the United States. He looked skeptical, or maybe he was suppressing a chuckle. Who told you that you could run for president? At that point, I went from feeling mortified that everyone else had recognized me here to feeling irritated that this guy didn't believe me. I don't know what to tell you, man, I said. I mean, I spent an hour and a half talking it over one-on-one with Obama in his office, and he seemed to think it was a pretty good idea. The doctor sat back in his chair. Barack Obama told you that you could run for president? He tapped his notebook a couple of times with his pen, then pursed his lips. So, how often would you say you hear voices? Chapter 1. The Uniform. Something happens to you the first time you put on a uniform. I think this is true for anyone, from an orchestra conductor putting on a tux, to a nurse slipping into scrubs, to a UPS driver getting dressed in the brown ensemble. The first time you see yourself in that uniform, a strange clarity settles over you. Suddenly, you are a part of something. When you look in the mirror, you don't see someone wearing clothes anxiously picked out that day. Instead, you see someone with a place in the world, creating music, healing people, delivering packages, a job, a purpose, or in my case, a mission. At 4:45 a.m. in Washington, D.C., I put on an Army uniform for the first time. It was 2002, and everyone else in our little apartment in Glover Park was fast asleep. Diana, my fiancée at the time, was in bed, and our rotund little pit bulls, Winston and Shelby, snored beside her.